Hey there. Welcome to the Pelvis Project podcast. I'm Megan.
And I'm Roxy. We're two pelvic health experts brought together by passion for our careers, entrepreneurship, motherhood, and the desire for intentional relationships.
Join us in our mission to spread pelvic floor awareness and start conversations surrounding the truth behind genuine health, imperfect wellness, and joyfully navigating life. We are so glad you are here with us.
Let's start the conversation.
Good evening, Roxy.
Hello.
All right. We're excited for this episode. I think it's going to hopefully be pretty enlightening. We are going to talk about chronic pain and how it can change the brain. So this kind of rewiring pain and that there's hope and what we can do about it. So hopefully it'll be pretty interesting. Before we get started, we will do our normal tell me something good. Roxy, do you want to start?
Sure. I think we just had a really good weekend over Easter and just with family and spending time as a family. And I'm grateful I took Friday off because I was off of school. So us girls kind of hung out for the morning. And then, I don't know, I think it's a good time to reflect and make sure we have our priorities in line spiritually and whatnot. So that was just a good, refreshing time, I think.
Yep. It's kind of the same for me. It was just a good weekend. Family was in town. I'm always just filled up by that. Getting to see my brother and my nephews and just lots of good laughs and listen to the kids play together. And so same goes for me. Just good weekend, good reflection. So anyway, well, let's get started and we'll dive right in. So what brought this topic up was I have had a couple people here recently, and somebody in particular today that has been in a pain cycle for like over years for a chronic condition. So when we're talking about chronic, we'll kind of talk about what's acute, what's chronic. But this person is getting ready to go on a trip, and she hasn't traveled in 3 years, and she hasn't because of this pain. And so this family trip they're planning, and they're leaving on Friday, and it's bringing up a lot of feelings and concerns about can she tolerate it, different things like that. So I had a really great discussion today about reviewing, all the progress she's made over this past year with me and what she wasn't able to do and what she is able to do now, and showing how you have to retrain the brain and retrain the body for it to kind of rediscover, if you will, that it's safe. It's safe to be able to do these things, and it doesn't mean it has to have an overactive response. And sometimes this stuff's hard to hear because you're like, wait, are you telling me that, it's all in my head? And it's like, no, it's not all in your head. The pain is real. But hopefully, as you listen to this podcast, you'll kind of understand a little bit of how the changes in the brain, kind of the way that this all works. And that there is oftentimes that we do have to make conscious decisions and awareness of when things happen, like more of a curiosity, like, oh, hello, and retraining. This doesn't mean that there's something danger happening. This doesn't mean I'm being chased by a bear. I just have this hyper sensitivity. And so anyway, I had a really great conversation. And I, in fact, told her, you can anticipate that your body's probably going to have a flare. I mean, you think about on the average Joe who gets ready to go out of town, the stress that comes from that and things that kind of come up right before you go out of town. And if you pile that on top of having kind of a chronic condition, it can exacerbate things. And it doesn't mean you shouldn't go. It doesn't mean you can't go, but it's helpful to have somebody that can kind of guide you through that and give you that feedback, because we don't know. We just know that we don't like the discomfort. We're scared. We don't want to have the setback. So anyway, we had a great conversation. I pointed out all the positives. I pointed out what we probably might see happen, how we're going to deal with that, how we're going to use the tools that she's already learned. She's going to put them in play and have a plan. And, I'm an email or phone call away if we need to have a little pep talk. But yeah, it was a good conversation, exciting. I'm excited for her. And also being a provider that I told her, like, I would tell you if I didn't think this was a good idea. And I'm telling you, you have made so much progress. This is a great time to try this. So anyway, that's what brought this up. And then also with that, a book that we both love. Any of Adrian Lowe's, he's a PT, specializes in pain science. He has a whole series of books that are called Why Do I Hurt? There's a general one. There's like, why does my pelvis hurt? Why do I have back pain? Like there's a whole series of them, and they're real small, broken up into very bite-sized pieces that are made for a patient to read. So I pulled that book out, and it's just so good and such full of such good information that I was like, man, we need to talk about this because a lot of people, it doesn't even probably register. So hopefully you find it helpful. And with that, let's kind of go in. Roxy, let's talk a little bit about what is chronic pain.
Sure. So the definition, just a blanket definition, is pain lasting longer than 3 months, often beyond the typical healing time. So if there's damage that happens in our body on the cellular level, we want to see like an inflammatory cascade happen and then see this kind of progressive improvement until we get back to normal. And so 3 months is beyond normal. And so if the body is still in pain after 3 months of the onset, then that tells us we're in that chronic phase, and our body's, in a sense, is almost kind of given up. It doesn't really know what to do at that point because it's done all the things it knows to do. And so now it's kind of just stuck in this pain, and it doesn't know how to finish healing, basically. And so in our world, when Megan and I are seeing people with chronic pain, a lot of like the common things that people come in with are just general pelvic pain or maybe back pain, fibromyalgia. We get a lot of abdominal pain or like digestive pain. Those types of things are examples of this. And so, there's some other things like obviously dyspareunia is pain with intercourse, but that's so circumstantial that it maybe doesn't fit exactly in the same mold just because people a lot of times aren't always in pain. They're just in pain at that one time or whatever. Doesn't mean that it's not chronic, but we're just kind of talking about these like persistent pain that's kind of all the time, or it's like either always low level or it goes up and down throughout life there. And so, yeah, just thinking about the difference between like, if you hear acute pain, that's more of just that really short-term, immediate pain that's really understandable. It makes sense. Like you roll your ankle, essentially, or even like, I don't know, Megan, you can agree or you can tell me what you think about this or not. But even just like menstrual cramps, for example, is like really acute. Like it's like short-term, and our body kind of inflames a little bit during that and then it goes away and there's a reason for it kind of. Things like that are just that shorter term. They're more of like a protective pain versus a chronic pain then is where the body gets kind of stuck in the rut. And that we can consider like maladaptive, where the body hasn't been able to overcome that.
Yeah. And I think like, when you speak about like menstrual cycle, that's why we're kind of like, okay, normal is you have some discomfort for maybe 1 or 2 days, it goes away. Where it's that chronic pain is the person that maybe has endometriosis or something like that, to where that pain, that cramping pain is the majority of the month. And so now your body's having this pain all the time. It's being fed. Your brain and body are going back and forth with each other. And it's like, it becomes the signal that gets all distorted. So that acute and chronic pain differentiation is kind of important to understand for sure when it comes to healing. There was something else you had mentioned. Oh, yes. I wanted to speak into when you talked about dyspareunia, which is painful intercourse. Often, if you have somebody that is having painful intercourse and when they experience painful intercourse, it's a very high level of pain. If people report, oh my gosh, it's like a 7 or an 8. We often will tell people, hey, until we get this pain level down, this is a situation where we're going to suggest that you just kind of hold off in having intercourse, because if we are continually exposing your body to that high level of pain, we're going to start a pain cycle cascade. And so we want to try to be able to stop that. And so that's when we might give a suggestion of like, okay, give us a couple of weeks to work together so we can get this pain level down. That's different when it's like a 7, 8, 9 out of 10 pain with that experience versus like a 2 to 3. We could still argue the fact that your body's anticipating that pain coming. And so we're going to have all this tension. But yeah, pain, it's so fascinating. And actually, you know what? We probably need to have our good old friend Paige come back on here, because she is specialized in the pain reprocessing theory stuff. So, which is really fascinating. We can talk more about that, but that's what we need to do next. Okay, so we're going to talk about the brain pain connection next. So, pain is an output of the brain, not just input from the body. So, one of the things that's really kind of cool in Adrian Lowe's book is he talks about how information is sent to the brain, and your brain is kind of like the CEO. And so that signal is sent to the brain via the nervous system, and there's checkpoints kind of along the way. So similar to how, like, if you're like the CEO, you're going to have of a business, you're going to have messengers and managers bring you information, and kind of like the game telephone, sometimes these messages become altered before they get to you. And that's kind of how your brain and your body are sending signals back and forth. So over time, the brain can become more sensitive. And this is a concept called central sensitization. And that's where we start to almost have I like to say, we have a spotlight, like there's a spotlight on. We haven't dimmed. It's like your light's on a dimmer. Your pain is always turned up to 100, like all the way on all the time, versus like the kind of that normal sort of relationship with the pain. So it's an interesting thing if you kind of think about the concept of pain pathways becoming like a well-worn, like hiking trail. It's just over and over and over again. And we know that thoughts, emotions, stress, those sorts of things influence that pain perception. So if you have chronic pain, you might notice that if you're in a stressful situation, your pain goes up. So I'm going to use a personal example for me. I've talked before about this, but I have Hashimoto's, which is an autoimmune disease. And for me, I refer to them as flares. And so that can kind of show up as different things. But for me, I will have often joint pain. My body will ache. I will not feel good. And so I have to like keep my pulse on that of what I need to do to keep my body, like pay attention to what my signals my body's giving me. But for example, Roxy knows this because we travel together to Pelvicon every year. But I do not like flying, and that stresses me out. And then the conference is fantastic, but there's a lot of input, a lot of people, a lot of go, go, go. So I'm getting all these like stress, thoughts, emotions, all this. And I have a flare every time. This is a perfect example. And I don't love that. And I'm working on it. And the last time was better than the time before that. The first trip, I was down and out after after I got back, and during, I felt terrible because I had come off the flight. So I had a huge stress response. My body went into kind of this more fight or flight where my pathways are for pain went up. And therefore I was just struggling the whole time. Learned that next time better, next time better. But I had to learn that. So that's just a good example. And then, so then we talked kind of about neuroplasticity. So neuroplasticity is the ability of your brain's ability to change, and it can change, and it can be retaught how to process the pain, which is so incredibly cool. Like there are things that can be done. Let's talk a little bit about how chronic pain can change the brain. How about you lead us in with that, Rox?
Sure. So when there's pain over and over and over again, and we have this chronic pain that happens, then more areas of the brain become involved in processing that pain. So then it isn't just a response from a sensory level, but it becomes like emotional. There can be like fear with it. And there's the anticipation that comes with it. So it becomes bigger than what the like trauma or the injured place is, if that makes sense. Basically, then the brain starts to anticipate pain, or it starts to assume that something's going to hurt, maybe worse than it actually does. And that, I think this is kind of a place where this can be a hard concept to educate on. That's why we're doing an episode on it, because I have a lot of patients that come, not a lot, but many over the years, I should say, that have said, well, my doctor just says it's all in my head. Well, it's like, okay, there's some validity to that. That's not the best messaging, probably. But it's this idea of saying let's say you get a splinter in your finger, right? Like that's legitimate, that's pain. But then, if it stays in there, it gets infected or it's festered. And then every time your hand reaches to grab something, it's anticipating that's going to hurt. So then your body gets fearful to reach and grab something or whatever. And so that it does become more exaggerated and more heightened. And that all happens inside the brain. It did start from damage. It is legitimately painful feeling, but it starts to like more of the brain starts to respond. So therefore we get a bigger response and a more chronic response that doesn't actually match what is actually happening on the sensory level or what's actually happening at that site of tissue damage where the pain started or originated at. And so then we go into, I kind of touched on this, that fear piece, but the fight or flight system then stays activated. And so that's like the sympathetic side. That's a really beautiful part of our body that we have in, survival mode
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
situations where
Yeah.
we need that. But it's really supposed to be situational and kind of maybe not momentary, but just temporary is maybe a better word for it, of saying we're in this situation where we need to survive. We need a little bit of some adrenaline maybe to help us get through something, that's really beautiful. But then our body is supposed to come out of that. And
Hmm.
when we have chronic pain, our body gets stuck in this survival mode. And we have this overdrive of the limbic system. And then that starts to become a whole body problem because the nervous system at that point isn't just in survival mode for that one part of our body. It puts our entire body into survival mode. So our thinking changes, our digestion changes, our sleep changes, all those things change as a response of this like beginning kind of potentially minuscule pain. It could have been a big deal of a pain, but just this more isolated pain then really compounds and we see these huge ripple effects because the brain overreacts pretty much and then our whole body responds too. And it's really a dysfunctional cycle. And that's where then this chronicity starts to kind of dominate our world. At that point, then the pain becomes less about the tissue damage and more about the perceived threat. And that's where I think that, well, it's all in your head comment. And even I think sometimes the most well-intentioned doctors or even PTs or whoever, if we maybe have this conversation not using the right verbiage or maybe don't have a good established relationship just yet with a patient, or if this is triggering for the patient, then that can be misinterpreted. And it's a well-meaning message to try to just help people understand how it becomes bigger than just the tissue damage and it becomes a whole system and it's beyond what it started as, and that's why it continues. But it just can a lot of times be misinterpreted. But then we see, like I kind of hinted on this, but just we see more systemic things happening like emotional exhaustion, fear of movement, pain catastrophizing, things like this where finally, like, I mean, I'm just using the splinter in the finger as like
Yeah.
an example, but finally then like your whole world kind of becomes obsessed with not letting that splinter area be affected or be touched or, whatever. And this is just wherever the area of pain is. But then it kind of starts to consume the body, whether you're conscious of it or not. The body's consumed with protecting that area, even if it doesn't need protecting anymore.
Yeah. We always like to say pain is a beautiful thing. It's our body responds. It's supposed to protect us and teach, like a hot touch and a hot burner. You perceive that. Oh, it tells you to take your hand away. Really, yeah, the neuroplasticity and the way that we can change the perception and retrain is really, really amazing. One thing that I think is from this book and cited in and the research from it is they know like pain is individualized, which makes it very hard to treat. And so you need a very tailored treatment plan to your pain. I mean, how could I say that my perception of pain is the same as your perception of pain? That's also when you're working with somebody, you have to learn this about chronic pain type of patients. My patients that have endometriosis their body is taught to have such a high pain tolerance that what their interpretation of pain is, you can tell by responses. So like they tolerate pain that's so much higher that sometimes you have to be careful because you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like that's actually not a healthy amount of pain to to accept. And so we have to have that conversation, and you see it across the board. And so if you're somebody who is experiencing this, and you're working with somebody, if they're not used to that, or they don't know kind of how to pick up on those things, it's important that you find somebody that knows how to treat chronic pain, because it really is. And we'll talk about this. How you address chronic pain is definitely different than how you're going to address acute pain. 100%. But as Roxy was talking about with the brain and the different parts, one thing I thought that's really interesting is they have researched it, and when they're researching pain, they look at the sensation areas, they look at the movement areas of the brain, fear areas, focus and concentration area, memory area, motivation, stress response. And so they kind of, in the book, they talk about how like your brain is that CEO, and then it's taking information from all these other areas of your brain, and they're almost having a board meeting. They talk about it as a board meeting, and they're discussing all the pain, and then they're trying to figure out how they're going to execute and what they're going to do. That determination of what action needs to be required to then protect you is what's happening. And so then if it's becoming a loud meeting, then that's when that body starts to respond in a manner that might not be as helpful as we think.
Well, and I think that just even thinking about that maybe highlights the fact too that at that point, like, yeah, if someone isn't trained to treat chronic pain, then they're going to treat the tissue site. And that's like doing the whole person a disservice.
Yeah.
And then just really thinking about if they let's say they go to therapy, and we're treating this area of the body that has the pain, and we're not treating the mind, we're going to jump into some of these strategies. If we overlook that, then that person starts to think, well, goodness, I went to therapy, or I tried an injection, or I did all these things treating the tissue, and thinking, well, I guess this is just how life is. And then that fuels that belief, and that fuels just that brain change, that solidifies that and says, okay, I guess this is right. I guess this is how life is.
Yeah.
And so it is just it's like these are people's quality of life that we are messing with, kind of like we have to treat the whole person so that that person believes that they can be better, that they will get better. And it very much is possible. But I see that so often to be like, well, we tried therapy and that didn't work, or we tried an injection and that didn't work. So this is just, it's just how it is. And, I manage this, and, you just kind of get these really complacent conversations happening because someone has unknowingly done the patient a disservice by just treating the tissue, treating the site of the original pain, and not stepping back and saying, what's really going on here with their pain?
Yeah. I just had this happen. I'm working with somebody new, and it's for vaginismus, which we've had an episode on that. I can't remember which episode, so you can go back and listen to that if you're kind of wanting to know more. But basically, like pain with inserting a tampon, getting married soon, is concerned because of that, of, what intimacy is going to be like. And so she's preemptively been, working on this, but she's known this for a very long time. She actually did a whole year of pelvic floor therapy with somebody, and basically, used the dilators, all the things, and said, I did it for a year, really didn't get better. Therapy stopped. I stopped doing the stuff at home. There really wasn't much change. And you can tell that wore her down. Like, she's questioning now a lot of things. And so listen to her. I'm confident in the fact that I can help her through this. It's one of those things, this therapist, it's not a cocky thing. It's just a confident thing. Like, we have lots of tools. We've seen cases similar. We also, we've talked about this before. Roxy and I both have clinics that focus more on whole body and have a whole hour of every session. And somebody like this, you're not going to be able to go in and have a 30, 45-minute pelvic floor session and accomplish what needs to be accomplished. And that's just the truth. Anyway, her first visit, we spent a ton of time on education, a ton of time on anatomy, pain, all that stuff. Got her going on first few things to do for home. Actually didn't do any internal assessment on the first day because I didn't want to rush it because of her experience before. But I had her start on some of her own self-stretching since she was familiar. Comes back second visit and says, I feel like I've already made progress. I feel like I've made more progress in one visit than I did in a year. That there, as Roxy mentioned, if we're just treating the tissue and we're missing the fact that this thing has gone on and on and on, and we are not able to step back and look at this person as a whole and figure out how we're going to address the deeper pain science piece of this, like to your point, you end up doing somebody a disservice, a whole year worth of trying this. And, listen, at some point after you've been going, if something's not changing with somebody, you either need to refer or it's okay to ask for help if you are the provider. So anyway, these things happen and, it's no fault of anybody other than like, it's just kind of one of those things where you're like, okay, this happened. Let's keep moving. And I love that. I mean, I think it talks about it in this book of like the areas of the brain that light up under an MRI with pain. And then the first thing they did was just educate on pain science and they re-MRI'd people's brains. And those areas were not as lit up. And just that alone helped with somebody's pain. So there's power in education on this. So let's talk a little bit about how you can retrain the brain and what actually helps. We're just going to touch on this and hopefully let's wrap that up. And this will bring some good food for thought on all of this. So before I dive into that, I just want to touch on the things that what can show up after prolonged, like protected responses that we get from pain. So you can end up getting, you're going to have tender areas, mood swings. This is all pulled from Adrienne Lowe's book, appetite changes, fatigue, weight gain, sleep disturbance, posture issues, stomach sensitivity, decreased sex drive. That's pain and especially chronic pain. That's going to wipe out any sex drive for sure. Problems with focus and concentration and depression. So as you can see, that's a long list of things that can pop up if you've been dealing with some sort of chronic condition. So, but there is hope. In fact, I love this. Let me read you this little piece. When experiencing persistent pain, your brain produces less of the medicine helping you on a daily basis to deal with pain. So he's talking about dopamine. Is this permanent? Can this be changed? The answer is yes. It can be changed as follows. So this is out of research, people. It can be changed. So first is knowledge, education, books like what he has here, and we can share it on our Instagram page or maybe link it here in the show notes. So if anybody's interested in this book, you should definitely get it. But first thing is knowledge. That is key, as we've talked about. We definitely also want to have some aerobic exercise, so some sort of movement. We want a goal of 30 minutes a day, but we can start with small bits, like 10 minutes or so. So graded exposure to movement. So slowly reintroducing movement in a safe, non-threatening way. And I teach a lot of my patients that I see with autoimmune disease and different, especially like endometriosis, stuff like that exercises kind of come off of the table because of pain. We have to figure out a way together to make it bite-sized, and it's slow. And the hardest thing for people is when they're having a good day, they want to push past and do more, and then it can kind of backfire on you. And so really being able to like honor yourself and slowing down for a couple weeks and saying, okay, I'm going to go walk, but I have to stop myself at this much time. And I know that sounds really counterintuitive because society is kind of like, get up early, go, like be disciplined, like all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, my discipline is for right now, as I'm rebuilding these building blocks, the discipline is I have to stop myself because if I don't, I could flare and be out for a week. So let's stop here. So tomorrow, now I can come back and do it again. And the next day I can come back and do it again. And the next day again. And then you build and you've graded your exposure. So now you can tolerate it more and you're listening to the cues of your body and you're becoming the expert in your body. I'm getting all fired up about this. Yes, it is. It's hard. It's hard to kind of like have these conversations, get people to pull back, but it is so beautiful what can happen on the other side of it. Retraining the brain. Okay. So also breath work and nervous system regulation. So really working on things that calm the fight or flight system It might be like vagus nerve activation, diaphragmatic breathing, tapping, different sort of activities that help with the calming of the fight or flight. So therefore, you're starting to not have that feeling of like you're being chased by a bear all the time. So next would be something like, mindfulness and meditation. So this reduces the brain reactivity and increases the body's awareness. We have to be able to be still in order to find the awareness and to listen to what our body is telling us. So there are a lot of things that we are going at a fast pace and we just completely look over it. The amount of people that come in, or the amount of people out there probably walking around that have like IBS, or, they're constantly nauseated and they're just like, oh, it must have been something I ate. Oh, it must have been something I ate. If we slow down enough, it's like, okay, actually, it's not something you ate. It's your nervous system. We're riding on cortisol. We are riding on fight or flight. And okay, let's look at that. Like, how can we pull that back? But we just override all the time and just keep pushing. Manual therapy work and like touch therapy, so body work, can change the brain's pain map through safe sensory input. There are so many people we see that when we go to first touch them, so like people's abdomen, I'm working on that. It's guarded. I can hardly get any depth. And it's slow exposure. And we get to a point where you can get deep, you can work viscerally. Same thing if we're working on somebody's back, you can barely touch them. And it's so cool. And that gets people excited as well. They're like, oh my gosh, like look what my body is allowing now. So again, it's that pain map and that safe sensory. This is where that neuroplasticity, like retraining the brain. Consistency and repetition. So retraining requires repetition. Basically, we're doing physical therapy to the body. This is like physical therapy to the brain. So retraining, repetition. It might seem mundane, but if you stick with it for, 3-4 weeks, that's when then you can start to modify. And then positive belief and support. So having hope, trust in your provider, and validations are powerful. We believe what we hear. So if we are in an environment of negativity and constant questioning, that is just going to be what we do. If we are in a state and we can keep the positive sort, and not toxic positivity by any means, but keeping the script that's going in our brain of in a positive place, I can do this. My body can heal. My body, like just some of the stuff seems kind of silly, but it's really actually important. And I've actually been playing with this with myself here recently in some different situations outside of pain. But my belief system of things about myself, if I'm constantly saying these things, like these negative things, that's what I'm going to believe. So it's the same thing goes for pain.
Well, and I find myself with, especially with these people, is that we've talked about this before, but like two things are true. So you can say, yeah, this isn't comfortable,
Yeah.
but I'm working on it. Or this isn't comfortable, or this is different than what I would normally do. But different can be good, and I think just even accepting, like you were talking about that toxic positivity, to be like, oh, I'm good, I'm fine. Like, no, that's not actually what we're saying. In fact, we want the brain to really feel what it feels, because we've talked about this big perception that's happening instead of what are you actually feeling right now? Not what does your body assume you're feeling, or we're moving so fast that we are assuming it's hurting that much, but saying, no, let's slow down and really feel what we feel. And then we can make more of an objective, truthful statement about that. Yeah, that doesn't feel great, but now I can move and, or that doesn't feel great, but I slept better last night than I have, or that doesn't feel great, or I hurt, but, I'm working on it. And I have some things in front of me that are different than I've ever been able to do. And I'm going to keep working on that, And so I think just really, as Megan was going through kind of those strategies there, how to retrain the brain, really the big theme that I kind of see, or the thread that goes through a lot of that, is really slowing down and being intentional, and like seeing our body, seeing our symptoms, seeing our life, seeing our reaction for what it actually is, instead of what we think it should be, or what we assume it is, or whatever. And then that allows that change when we can prove to our body, oh, that isn't painful, that just is annoying. Or that used to be painful, but actually now, like, that's not that bad, or, or
Yeah.
that's just a bothersome feeling. It isn't actually pain, and when we can just see it for what it really is, I think that then opens our eyes. And then I kind of tell my patients this sometimes, like, we can build more rapport with ourselves when we override how our body's been working. The body's going to say, who the heck are you? And what do you think you're doing? This isn't what we normally
Yes.
do. We
Yeah.
usually curl up in a
We don't
ball or
do
we lay
that.
in bed or
Yeah.
whatever. But if you can override and say, no, actually, I'm going to do a couple gentle breaths, instead of curling up in a ball. And really what's going to happen is nothing terrible is going to happen, probably, and the body says, oh, okay, like she actually knows what she's doing. Or, like, oh, okay, that didn't turn out terrible. And okay, maybe next time we'll kind of believe her a little more. And it's that graded exposure then we're talking about, of saying we have to convince our body and we have to have our brain be in control instead of this pain dominating us. And that's all. The power is in our hands, not Megan and I's hands, but in the individual's hands.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're just trying to
Just guide it.
equip you, and give you tools in your tool belt to help your brain see life differently and see your body differently and see your circumstances differently. And then that causes healing.
Yeah. Gosh, it brings up, just think about so many like cases over the years of people that I've seen. And I think that having that, like whatever provider you're working with, if you don't trust that they can do what like if you just really just don't trust it and you don't believe it, that's going to be tough. And so, yeah, I mean, they're going to continue to work with you and try to build that trust, but it is pretty important. But then also to the hope piece of it. I have a patient that I saw when I was working back in my rehab days early in my career. And this individual had a pretty significant stroke. And I, was fairly new at that point. I worked there for about 3 years after I graduated. So in early PT, and I really, it was the first time that I was like, I just do not think that this individual is going to walk again. Like, it's just not. And I worked with an occupational therapist and he had so many years of experience. And he was like, I have some hope that I think he might be able to. And I will never forget like us walking that man down the hallway, and he had to he used like a quad cane or a Hemi walker, but he was doing it. And I just remember to myself, like, all right, there's hope. Like, there's hope in all of this. And so I think that, like, whenever I have a new case where it seems pretty, it's just very challenging for somebody, like, I have hope no matter, like, I can't, moving forward since that in my career was actually a pretty life-changing thing for me to see, because it's just not a question in my mind. I'm like, yep, there's hope. Okay, let's go. So we'll just kind of recap. Kind of the key messages here is pain is real. It's in the brain, but that means it can be changed. So the pain is real. Let's say that again. Okay. And then we would just, like, if this is something that you're dealing with, we just want to empower you to kind of seek care from somebody that looks at the whole person and not a fast pace, get in, get out, quick, fast touches. And we're not addressing the whole person. And if you have maybe been approached, that's what you need, and you didn't want to receive that well, and you're like, no, like that's woohoo, like I don't want to do that. I would really encourage you to circle back, like circle back, indulge us, because it's pretty amazing once you can kind of get that correct care for the neuroplasticity, like the changing of the brain process.
And I would just add to that, like, it's evidence-based, it's
Yeah,
scientific, it's
yeah,
cellular. It's not this like in the air fantasy
yeah,
theory. Like, it's cellular, like it's evidence,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
our body. And so, yeah, if you do have questions, I'd be curious about it. If you feel like, oh, this is kind of weird, this is kind of wonky, ask more questions, because there's a lot of science. There is science behind it, and there's evidence behind it, and it's cellular change,
yeah.
neural changes that we
Neural
can
changes
track,
for sure.
that we can
Yep,
see. Hmm.
definitely. So yeah, we would love if this is something you've got questions about, send us a message. Pelvic health PTs, OTs that are trained, to treat holistically and the whole body can play a really crucial, valuable role in retraining the brain and the body. So even if you're somebody with chronic pain and you're like, well, I don't really have pelvic floor problems, I would actually still tell you to go find a pelvic floor therapist. And you don't actually have to. I mean, I have plenty of patients that we don't do pelvic floor work anymore. It's purely this type of stuff. That's what I would say. Or if you have like a chronic orthopedic problem that isn't quite getting better, that's the other thing I would say is maybe just think about the approach of a pelvic floor therapist. So if you have any questions on anybody in your area, pelvicrehab.com is a really great website you can go to do a search. Of course, you could always shoot us a message, and we're happy to try to connect you with our colleagues that are all across the country. We are going to see if we can get our good friend, occupational therapist that is a master in all things pain reprocessing on here so we can have another conversation about it. I think that would be great. But hopefully this episode was helpful for you, and we are looking forward to keeping the conversation going. Thank you so much for joining us this week on the Pelvis Project podcast. Help us continue the conversation by liking and sharing this episode with friends. And if you really want to do us a solid, leave us a review. If you'd like to follow us on social, check out the show notes for links. And remember, this week, take a deep breath and relax your pelvic floor.